Hello, Realtors. Welcome to the January Legal Podcast. I'm Byron King, Chief Legal Officer at South Carolina Association of Realtors. We have a special guest from NER Legal, Maame Nyamekye, and our other legal team, Austin and Tiara. Say hello, please.
Hello.
Hi.
And you can contact us on the legal hotline at 803-712-3478 or email info@screaltors.org, Byron at screaltors.org. Austin at screaltors.org, T. Pitts at screaltors.org. Mike Christ is directing and producing today. Thanks to Mike. Our special guest, Maame, joined NER in 2021. She's an associate legal counsel and handles a variety of contractual matters and provides ongoing legal counsel to the National Association of Realtors, including internal groups and teams and NER's subsidiaries and affiliates. She provides legal counsel to NER's Realtor Benefit Program, advising on strategic alliance agreements. Maame also serves as legal counsel to the Realtor Relief Foundation and Realtor Fund for Global Assistance, where she assists with global governance, state and federal compliance, and advises on charitable activities. Maame serves as staff executive for NER's Risk Management Issues Committee. Maame's legal career commenced as an intern at the Supreme Court of the United States, and following law school, she went into private practice where she represented nonprofit organizations, including associations and religious organizations and small businesses. Very interesting. We'll hear some more from that during the presentation. Maame received her degree in business administration from Marymount University and graduated cum laude from the University of Baltimore School of Law. Maame is admitted to practice in Maryland, the District of Columbia, and for the Supreme Court of the United States. Maame, thanks for joining us today. You've got an important presentation on data security that can impact associations and brokers and even agents. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's definitely a pleasure to be with you and your team and before your members as well.
Super. And we've got our introductions, and if you'd like, you can go ahead and give your presentation. What we'll do, we'll have kind of our top 10 hotlines, a segment we always do, and our Is It Legal question and answer game. And then we'll have some questions as we go through your presentation. But if you'd like to share your screen and go through your presentation, it would be great to hear from you.
Absolutely, absolutely. So as you mentioned, Byron, this is a very important topic, which is data privacy. And whenever I'm talking about data privacy, I like to start off with this quote from Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple. And he says, "If you put a key under the mat for the cops, a burglar can find it too." Criminals are using every technology tool at their disposal to hack into people's accounts. If they know there's a key hidden somewhere, they won't stop until they find it. And this quote is so profound because it impacts all industries, right? And including the real estate industry. And when we're talking about that key, we're talking about personal information that we may have, whether we're an association, which is our members' information, account information and passwords, whether we're MLS, login information, consumer information, whether you're a brokerage or a property management company, you name it, there's going to be some personal information that you're going to have to hold, store, process for your business operations. And unfortunately, in the time that we're in, these cyber criminals are lurking around trying to find where they can get that information. And so what I like to do is encourage our members to understand what they need to do to have a secure place to hold their information, what the laws say, those safeguards they need to have in place, and so forth. So let's go in and talk about the law, a little bit about what we're seeing when it comes to data privacy laws, and see how you may or may not be subject to one or two of these laws. Let's see. So starting out with the laws, we would like to start off with the comprehensive data privacy laws. Now, as a nation, we do not have a federal comprehensive data privacy law yet, but we are seeing a growing number of states enacting comprehensive data privacy laws. So someone might be wondering, what do you mean by comprehensive data privacy law? Well, typically these laws combine common provisions for consumer rights and business obligations. So when we're talking about consumer rights, we're talking about the right to access information that a business may hold, the right to correct information that a business may hold if it's incorrect or outdated personal information, the right to request that the information be deleted as well. So those are a number of consumer rights. The laws may also include some other consumer rights as well. But then also there are business obligations as well under these laws. So something that we like to call the notice transparency requirement. So this is an obligation placed on the business to provide notice to consumers about certain data privacy practices, their operations, their programs. Also, an obligation to on the business to conduct formal risk assessments of privacy. And then, if a consumer elects to exercise their rights that they have under the law, the business is prohibited from discriminating against the consumer. So, those are just a few of the consumer rights and business obligations that you'll typically find under a state comprehensive data privacy law. Currently, we have 13 states, and this number is growing each and every week, I say, but 13 states so far that have enacted a comprehensive data privacy law. As many know who follow these laws, California was the first state to enact a comprehensive data privacy law, and we started to see other states follow. California even went ahead and amended the law as well. And so we're seeing a trend across the nation as states are introducing new bills and being sent through committees and so forth, and then to the governor's desk. So I anticipate that this year that number will definitely grow. It grew probably about a good handful last year. So definitely going to see more this year as well. But while not every state has a comprehensive data privacy law, there are a handful of other states that have data disposal laws. So these laws govern the disposal of personal data. So we have currently 35 states that have a data disposal law enacted for businesses who hold data, and they require them to securely destroy or dispose of paper or electronic records containing personal information. Now, we also have data security breach notification laws. All 50 states, including DC and the US territories, have enacted a data security breach notification law. And these laws, as you can imagine, require businesses to provide notification of security breaches involving personal information. And then lastly, what we have is the data security laws for the private sector. And currently, we're about 25 states plus the District of Columbia that have enacted such a law that requires businesses to implement and maintain reasonable security procedures and practices. So, as you can see, the laws are there regarding data privacy. And if your state does not necessarily have a comprehensive data privacy law, one thing I could say is it's going to come probably relatively soon. But even until then, most likely your state is going to fall under data disposal laws. Your state definitely has a data security breach notification law, and most likely also a data security law that pertains to the private sector.
Great, and it's going to be interesting to you, Maame. In South Carolina, almost everybody listening to this hits home because in 2012, our South Carolina Department of Revenue was hacked. So 3.6 million of our Social Security numbers went on the dark web. So anybody that filed taxes in South Carolina from 1998 to 2012 was hacked, and that information went on the dark web. And the state of South Carolina even provided us with monitoring service for 6 years. So we recommend that you contact the hotline with any questions about the laws and maintain a monitoring on your credit and locks on your credit. And like you're talking about, in South Carolina, we have several codes that you can call the hotline about. We've got our Consumer Protection Bureau, Department of Consumer Affairs, kind of handles all this, but there's a data security for insurance licensees. Like you mentioned, there's state law, and if there's a breach, like if hackers get into a brokerage or an association and get social security numbers or account numbers, credit card numbers, that's all what they call PII, the personal identification information, and there's written or telephone breach notification or emails. We have a state law if that happens with medical records, and a state law in schools and for government. Austin, Tiara, any comments on anything Maame brought up in her first part of her presentation?
Yeah, I've actually seen the breach notification before on one of either a credit card I have or something. They notified me, so I now I see exactly why, that it was a part of a law that they had to do that. But I have been notified personally of a breach in data before, and that just lets you know to go from there and try to secure your data. On a lot of the different credit reporting agencies, you can log in directly and kind of freeze your credit at that moment until you kind of take stock of what's going on. So I think that is useful, and the sooner those notifications gets out, the better that you can prevent yourself from any potential additional fraud.
Austin, what kind of things have you heard about with data security and privacy?
I mean, just the general stuff. That's like a lot of what you're talking about. You know, something happens with a brokerage. How do they notify clients? What are the procedures for doing so? Certainly, I'm sure we're going to discuss that a little bit more, but it's good to know that there is a basis in state law that you at least need to be aware of, and certainly we're here on the hotline to help you with that.
Yeah, great job. What you got next for us, Maame?
Yeah, so now that we understand that there are a number of laws that pertain to data privacy, there's business obligation and then the consumer rights and so forth. A lot of times people ask, okay, so that's the law. So what can I do? What are some practical steps that I can take as a business owner, as a local association, as a property management company, you name it? What can I do to ensure that I try to secure that data and mitigate the potential risk of that cyber criminal gaining access? And so usually I like to provide these practical tips. One, you want to make sure that you are backing up that data. And I always say it's one thing to back up the data, but it's even better to secure that backup data. I think a lot of times we think that, okay, we're securing the data here and we have it backed up somewhere in the cloud, which is great. But is that backup data in the cloud secure as well? So making sure that you're securing your backed up data is very important. You also want to make sure that you're conducting periodic assessments. I think I talked about under one of the laws, that is actually a business obligation that law may have as well. So taking that initiative to making sure that periodically you're assessing who has access to this data, how can they control the data, where is the data located, making sure that you're taking those steps as a business to make sure that you're checking off all of those boxes in regards to that important information that needs to be secured. Another one is reviewing vendor agreements, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit as we move forward. And then also adopting policies and procedures. And I like to always tie this in with training staff. I always say it's one thing to have a policy and procedure in place, but it's another thing to make sure that your staff is well trained and they know exactly what is in those policies, so that in the event something takes place, they know exactly what to do and how to respond. So let me shift over to the vendor agreements, because there are usually some common provisions that I like to highlight as we are talking about these vendor agreements. And as a business, as we know, there are a lot of times that we're outsourcing certain services to vendors, third parties. And that also means data that's being shared, right? So when I'm talking about vendor agreements, I'm talking about those agreements that you have in place and making sure that you understand what those provisions are. And this is a great time to get your legal counsel involved to take a look at what those provisions say, right? So we're talking about, does this agreement adequately and clearly define what a security breach is? And if there is a complaint, how is that going to be handled? What procedures does this vendor take in regards to a security breach? If there's remediation, who's going to handle the expenses? Any disclosure to third parties, who's going to be responsible for that? Also, you want to check to make sure that the agreement defines confidential and personal information, and understanding, okay, if this agreement expires or terminates, is there going to be a return or destruction of the confidential and personal information? So that should be clearly stated within the agreement. Also, indemnification. What happens if a third party raises a claim against your business because of a failure of the vendor? Will the vendor defend, indemnify, and hold your business, from losses and damages and so forth? That should be stated within the agreement. And as we know, service providers or vendors oftentimes have authorized persons, as they like to call them, who will have access to your account, your business account, the data, they need that so they can, perform the services that they're being contracted for. So who will have this information? Is there going to be oversight over this person? What procedures will be conducted and so forth? And something that may seem obvious, but it's really good to have in the agreement, ensuring that the vendor will comply with all applicable laws, industry standards, you name it. And then lastly, another common provision that I'd like to highlight is audit. Do we have the right to audit? How frequent can we audit? Will the vendor also conduct their own audits, internal audits as well? Now, these provisions are just a few that I've highlighted. There are definitely others, depending on the agreement. I know a lot of times businesses tend to have long-standing relationships with service providers. So sometimes there are renewal agreements and you sign it and you're just moving on. But I always encourage people, take a pause, take a look at that agreement. Even if it's a renewal one, take a look. Maybe you haven't checked out these provisions pertaining to data security and privacy, and work with your legal counsel to make sure that the necessary provisions are in place, clearly stated, and they meet your business needs and operations, especially with securing that data. And if there's a new agreement in place, even better opportunity as before you sign to take a look at those provisions. That's a really great way to start securing your data, especially when it's going to be outsourced to a third party to provide certain services to meet your business needs.
Yeah, that's great information, my man. I liked how you started this. We were talking about, the old school of locking the doors and locked filing cabinets. This is just an extension of that with electronic data. Austin, a couple two-part questions, because Austin handles our statewide professional standards and he monitors the real estate commission. Austin, if a broker had a breach like this and say a buyer or a seller was damaged in addition to lawsuits, could the code of ethics apply to that broker, or even license law apply to that broker if there was a breach and they were negligent, they didn't do any of the things that we're talking about today? What could happen to a broker, a licensee in South Carolina? It's a realtor member.
Yeah, absolutely. So under Article 1 of the Code of Ethics, you have an obligation to act in the best interest of your client, and within that is Standard Practice 1.9, which deals with preserving confidential information. So certainly that could apply there. Some of the general provisions as well in license law regarding, again, acting in the client's best interest, doing what is reasonable, competent, honest, fair, that all is included in there. So you could have some liability on both the license law and ethics front if this was to occur and you were to not take the proper steps.
And then you see the commissioners. How do you think the commissioners would react if a member of the public filed a complaint and said they didn't do anything that Mame's talking about today? There's no policy, there's no audits, no training, there's completely negligent with their electronic personal identification information, and a consumer was harmed. In your opinion, how would the commissioners maybe react if a license law complaint was filed or something like that?
So, the commission is there to protect the public. So, if you are not protecting the public in a real estate transaction or protecting their data, certainly that would be stuff that would probably be not viewed in the most favorable light. And generally, they have issues with folks who are exercising proper supervision or having proper policies and procedures in place.
Right. And then, Tiara, you were talking about some of the things on the hotline you've gotten about like vacant land sale scams. How would something like this, how could this interact with some of the personal information and vacant land sale scams that you've had on your hotline?
Yes, so we've been getting a lot of calls about the vacant land scams. I just had someone tell me it happened to them last week. So that was very unfortunate. So we're just trying to get the information out there to prevent it, because of course once a wire transfer goes through, it's not a lot that can be done at that point. So, we're kind of trying to prevent it by getting the education out. We have Forewarn, which is a service where you can run a quick background check on potential buyers or sellers in the course of your real estate business, of course. You don't want to use that outside of that as the terms of the a compliance agreement, but that can be useful, as well as just having policies in place where you're verifying certain information, especially if it's a out-of-town person that can't meet with you face-to-face. That's not in itself a red flag, but you may want to have policies where you're collecting certain information that you can verify that that person is the actual owner of the property, because of course once it already happens, it's often too late to try to get the money back, and then you have issues of someone paid for something but not necessarily having an accurate deed to that property.
That's a good point. Maybe think if you're doing like your realtor safety or your forewarn checks, a lot of times realtors will make copies of a driver's license or take a picture of it with their cell phone. And the forewarn report's got some personal information on there, so maintaining security on that data. It's probably a screenshot on your phone or a printout in a file. That all becomes something that falls under what Maame is talking about.
Oh, and that reminded me of a security issue. This app is used for protection for realtor safety. However, you do not want to basically use that information and put it on Facebook or even share that information with your clients. While you can use it as protection against yourself for safety or for the scams, you don't want to then disseminate that information because you'll be in violation of the privacy agreement of forewarn and your terms of usage. So you want to be careful with any information that you're receiving, because this is not something everyone has access to, and you want to be thinking about that and using that in the best interest of your brokerage and your status as a realtor.
Yeah, and this vendor stuff's right on point, Maame, because Austin handles our standard forms, and we have vendors, and we're very careful about what happens to that data, what they can do, because the forms data has all kinds of information in there. It would be a gold mine to an electronic internet crook. And then I see you got your next phase coming up. Maame, what's next on in your presentation?
Yeah. So I think I mentioned this a little bit before I started about the vendor agreements, but also the policies and procedures. I'm sure someone's wondering, okay, so what type of policies do I need to have? What type of procedures? Well, just to name a few, one to start is your website privacy policy. Now, this is what you will find typically on a business's website. If you probably scroll down, you'll see privacy policy. This is where the business will outline exactly what type of information that's being collected, how the information is being collected, what happens to the information that's collected, and how a user may obtain access to or request a correction or deletion of the information. And it's important for businesses to have this on the website, but also to periodically check and make sure that it's up to date. Sometimes businesses add new operations or features, you name it. So you want to make sure your privacy policy adequately addresses all the ways that you may collect information and how you use it, and making sure you're providing that information as to how a consumer may access their information, correct it, or delete it. Another policy or procedure that I like to highlight is the data security plan. Now, this plan is implementing and maintaining reasonable safeguards to protect security, confidentiality, integrity of data. And this also does include proper disposal of data, but this is more of an internal document that's provided and implemented by employees, right? So how internally we are going to make sure that we're securing this data that we're holding as a business. Another one is a data breach notification policy. And if you remember, all 50 states have enacted a data security breach notification law. So it's definitely important to have this type of policy in place to comply with your state laws. And it will also outline procedures to follow. So in the event that there is a breach, who's going to be responsible for the notification, and so forth. What teams are we going to work with? How, in a timely manner to make sure that we're notifying those who've been affected by this breach. And then also an incident response plan. This is how to recognize that a personal data breach has occurred. How do you escalate a security incident to the appropriate person or team, your insurance company, you name it. This incident response plan will outline what needs to take place, who's responsible for what. And I always say, making sure that the first time reading this by your staff, it shouldn't be when an incident takes place. If anything, this should be a document that has been reviewed. You've conducted trainings, and if anything, is used as a reference in the event of an incident. If that's the first time they're reading about it, then we're many, many steps behind. So these are just examples of some policies and procedures that I like to highlight to ensure that businesses are aware of what they need to have in place. Because a lot of times the question is, Okay, but what do I need to have? What is it called? I'm sure the next question will be, all right, we don't have one yet, so how do I start? Or we do have one, but it's outdated. And I usually like to reference our NAR data privacy toolkit, and I'll share that after this slide. So let's just recap some best practices here. One, it's important to know the laws. As we see, the laws are changing across the nation. Very soon, we're going to see many more states that have a comprehensive data privacy law. We have the data disposal laws. We have the data security laws. We have the security breach notification laws. Making sure that you're aware of what these laws are. Someone may ask, well, my state hasn't enacted a comprehensive data privacy law. Do I still need to be aware of it? And I say yes. One, because very soon your state may very likely have one. But two, what if you're working with an out of state resident, maybe someone in California or Colorado or New Jersey, where they have enacted a comprehensive data privacy law? You need to know what those consumer rights are. Be aware of them. Don't be surprised. You want to also make sure you're backing up that data and securing that data that's backed up. You want to have policies and procedures in place and training staff about these. And then, as we mentioned, the vendor agreements, making sure that you're understanding what the provisions are, working with your legal counsel to understand what they say, maybe you might need to make some modifications and so forth. And as I mentioned, the Data Security Privacy Toolkit is available. Here's a QR code that we have here. But this is, I say, one of the best resources that you can definitely take a hold of when you're looking at data security and privacy toolkit, especially within the real estate industry. This toolkit, as you see, there's a QR code, and I believe there'll be a link in the description of this podcast. It has an overview of data security and privacy, including the legal requirements. I mentioned a number of laws, so you're probably going to think, okay, well, let me see if my state has a law there. Well, this toolkit will tell you for sure. And then those policies and procedures I mentioned, we have templates available. So that website privacy policy, incident response plan, a security program, those policies are available as a template. Is a great starting point for you to utilize within your business. So definitely scan this QR code that you see, or if you see the link in the description, definitely check it out.
Super, and I printed one out here, Maame. And having a strong NAR, we rely on NAR a lot. They give some great information. Their website, nar.realtor, is very important. And I was thinking about while you're talking about printing some of these, say you have ransomware, you come into your brokerage and all your computers are locked up, and then you get a message from the criminals that say, give us, $40,000 to get into your data. It's good to have these things in paper as well, so you can, because you might not be able to access it on your computers. Our CFO, our COO, Alan Lightley's been training us. You talked about training. That's very important. And these policies can be part of your training, right? This is a way to communicate with your associated licensees or your employees, and also could maybe help with your defense if some incident happened. Tara, also, what are some ideas that y'all got from that segment of Maame's presentation?
Yeah, so we're working on establishing our policies here at the at SCR, and one of the things that's been added to our email is basically if you get any suspicious emails, it's a button that you can press that removes that from your folder and also sends that data to the company that we're using for this training so that we can protect ourselves, learn more about these scams, use the information we're gathering to develop policies and to know what to train people on. And we've also been doing different quizzes and, tests to kind of see our weak points to make sure that, the policies and the trainings are focused and that it's some of the common things that people, maybe I get messages that aren't really from my boss, but say, they're from him and they say, do you have a second to do this? Like certain things, once you see it enough, you'll automatically know this is not accurate, and it kind of trains your mind to know when you see something that just doesn't seem right. So that feature in our email is helping gather that data to make our training even more effective to the things, the different type of scams, because there are so many scams that target different groups and different people, and just the more data we know about it, the better equipped we can be to deal with it.
Super. Austin, any things you picked up from Maame's presentation?
Yeah, I mean, it's really two parts. It's one, making sure that you personally are taking care of all the data that you're responsible for. You're taking all the proper protocols yourself. But it's not just enough that you do it, it's that everyone else in your organization is as well. But certainly make sure that your house is clean before you start trying to police others, but make sure that you get your stuff in order. And then make sure, hey, from an organizational standpoint, it doesn't help if only 90% of people are on board, because that makes the 10% that are vulnerable, that's as good as having an open door. So just make sure that you're taking care of everything you're on your end, and then pushing for your organization to be an all-in approach to data security.
Yeah, so policies, written policies, train on those policies, and like Austin said, the weakest link could open the door to these internet criminals. What's next on your presentation?
Yeah, well, I have some more resources because, as we know, data privacy is just so important, and it's definitely best to be equipped with as much information as you possibly can have. So here on the screen here, I have another QR code to download some more resources, and this link will also be in the description of the podcast. But NAR's legal affairs team publishes a monthly video series on various topics. And as you can imagine, data privacy, cybersecurity has been one of those important topics. And we have about 3 or even more videos that you can watch. I have them listed here. One, creating a cybersecurity program, protecting your business from a ransomware attack. I think Tiara mentioned that. And then creating an effective data security plan. So you have the toolkit, but you also have these videos that you can also watch that are relatively short, no more than 4 minutes, that you can watch, understand, learn about cybersecurity and data privacy, and also any other resources that are available there. We also do provide a cybersecurity checklist, and there is a cyber risk management webinar. And I think Tiara also mentioned about the wire fraud. So we have the wire fraud notice template that members can use, and also FBI resources, because as you can imagine, this is a topic that's on the radar for the FBI. So there are resources available, including their reports, their fact sheets, and a directory of the FBI offices.
Super, and getting ready for today, I was looking for some stuff that a broker could do right now, right after you watch this video. You can get off this video or this podcast if you're listening in your car and get back to your office. Update your operating systems, update your antivirus software, your anti-malware software, change your passwords. Don't use the same password. Don't have a cheat sheet where you write all your passwords down on a piece of paper in your office. Change those periodically. We use kind of a two-step authentication with our phones, because then you have a password, and then you have to have physical control of the device that can help deter criminals. And some other stuff, a lot of stuff that's, we've heard a lot of lawyers, closing attorneys, and lawyers in South Carolina are encrypting emails and encrypting files to help protect with this. We talked about your data protection plan, inventorying, see what you've got. You're collecting Social Security numbers, loan applications with account numbers, credit card numbers, debit card numbers. You're getting checks for earnest money, checks for security deposits, checks for rent with those routing numbers and names on them. Inventory all that, clean house, secure destruction. We use a secure shredder company to make sure that documents get shredded. Check into insurance. The state association has cyber insurance through NAR, their insurance policy. Like Maame was looking at cloud storage or vendors looking for indemnification. Find out what they're doing on their policies, and then learn how to notify whenever the personal identification gets compromised. So some things you can do, like Tiara was talking about the wire fraud. We had a big wire fraud in South Carolina a number of years ago, Maame, where the realtor, she got an email and it said, attaches my pre-qual letter as a PDF, and she clicked on it and it spun, didn't do anything, and the FBI thinks that downloaded keystroke software that took down every keystroke she had. They got into her email, they cherry-picked, she was doing like 6 transactions, they cherry-picked of the 6 transactions, the cash deal, large cash deal, and that's the one they targeted for wire fraud, and then they inserted themselves with an email from her email, a legitimate email address, to the buyer saying, here's your wiring instructions to the law firm to wire hundreds of thousands of dollars they followed that email. Fortunately, it was the same bank. I mean, the story ends, it was a happy ending. The bank was able to stop it, but that's not always the case. We hear on the hotline. And what we do, we have a policy, a privacy statement, a security statement on our website, as does NAR. Tiara, Austin, any comments on that section of Maame's presentation?
Yes, I would like to ask, what would be the best practices if a key staff at a brokerage or even an association left that company and they had access to, the emails and they still had their access to different things within the company? How should a brokerage or association handle making sure that information is secure, especially maybe if it wasn't parting on the best of terms?
Yeah, well, I think definitely whenever you're parting ways with key staff members, you want to make sure as quickly as possible you are disconnecting any access that they may have, whether you anticipate that they'll be leaving or not, because the last thing you want is to make sure someone who is no longer with the organization still has access to your systems, operations, and so forth. So that's when you want to work swiftly with your IT department to make sure that they are acting promptly, to make sure that they remove any and all access to your system, so that even if that individual used to access some of your files and so forth on their phone, they may no longer do that. And that should be done immediately, quickly, because as we know, sometimes people leave not on the best of terms and may have some bad intentions. And the last thing you want is that information to still be available to that individual. But even if they are leaving on good terms and so forth, they no longer need access. So it should be a priority for the brokerage, the association, you name it, to make sure that when that person is leaving, they no longer have access, because honestly, it's not needed for them to have access anymore. And we want to make sure that the security of the personal information that the business, the association holds is priority.
Super. Austin, any things on that section?
Yeah, probably a two-part question. So what is probably the number one mistake you see folks make with data security? And then the second one would be, what is the number one issue or mistake someone who thinks that they are or holds themselves out to be tech savvy or is not sort of new to technology is making on the data security front?
Yeah, so for the first one, I think one common mistake is we are backing up the data, but we're not securing the backup data. And we have to recognize that these cyber criminals, they are kind of smart. So we want to make sure that if we're going to say, okay, we're securing data on all fronts. And that even means in the cloud, the backup data, because most likely they know that, okay, laws are changing, people are becoming more aware. So let's check that backup data that they have. And when they find that it's not secured, that's that key that I talked about that they found and they have access to. So that's a common mistake that you probably will sometimes hear when it comes to a breach of some sort. And remind me your second question.
Essentially, someone who goes, "Hey, I do a bunch of cyber training. I'm pretty technology literate." What is a mistake that somebody who maybe, for lack of a term, is sort of overconfident on their ability in the technology sphere makes?
Maybe they don't have a comprehensive policy in place, or it's outdated. And so then, like I said, the first time they're looking at that policy or procedures when the incident happens, and it's not even relevant to the times or the operations of the business. So with data privacy, you got to stay on your toes, right? We see the laws changing. Your business may evolve and change, making sure that you are not only aware of the laws, but making sure your policies are up to date. A lot of times I hear that, hey, we already have that policy in place or these procedures. But then when you ask, okay, when was the last time it was updated? We're talking about 7 years ago. And as we know, a lot has happened. I mean, we've even gone through a pandemic and things have changed with our operations and so forth. So we want to make sure that, while we're maybe confident that, yes, we're securing our data, we're in a good place, safeguards in place. Okay, but let's not forget our policies and procedures. Let's not forget about training our staff. I mean, if the last time they had a training was 2 years ago, I'm sure you've had new staff come in and I'm sure you've had some leave. So is everyone aware of what those policies and procedures may require? So that's something that sometimes can be overlooked when we think that we are, in a good position moving forward.
Thank you.
And how often should people do those backups?
Right now the guideline is periodically, and I don't like to give individuals a certain time, like every year or every 2 years. I say work with your IT department. You understand your business needs, you understand your operations, you understand where it's backed up and so forth. But your IT team, they're the experts, right? So they will know what is needed for your business. But I definitely wouldn't suggest that you should let years go by. Obviously, may need it, periodically throughout a year more than others. It all depends on your business needs, but working with your IT team is going to be very crucial.
Yeah, one thing, I mean, when you're talking about people leaving, one thing I thought of, it's not just people that leave, sometimes equipment leaves, somebody steals a phone or a laptop, or like you said, the employee leaves, they might take their laptop or their phone. So even like the copy machine, the office machine where you're copying, consumers' IDs or the forewarn information, or, mortgage applications, standard forms like Austin works on, all sorts of personal identification. And these copiers are little computers. They've got a hard drive, so making sure those are white before they go away. Same with computers, making sure they have a password. With phones, being able to track or remotely wipe them. Say they're stolen. Say somebody steals them while you're traveling or something, being able to wipe those. And then while you're traveling, things I think of is Wi-Fi, like trying to use your phone's hotspot instead of the coffee shop Wi-Fi or the hotel Wi-Fi. And these internet crooks, like you alluded to, are very savvy. A lot of times this is organized crime. So they've got resources and technical skills to mimic the hotel Wi-Fi or the coffee shop Wi-Fi. And I've even heard, we asked Mike Christ, our technical director, and Alan Lightly, our CFO, they were even talking about Bluetooth being a vulnerability. Be careful about leaving Bluetooth on your laptop or your phone. Anything that you've heard of when you travel, what are some safeguards that any of our staff take when traveling on some of these issues?
Yeah, well, I think you just touched on that. One of them is the open public Wi-Fi, because that is, just the open field for these criminals. So making sure, like, if I'm going to log on to a public Wi-Fi, I'm going to verify which one I'm getting onto, how much I'm even using and doing and so forth, because these cyber criminals, they love the open public Wi-Fi because they can copy it, they can easily access it. So and that's all part of training, right? So it's making sure that we're cognizant of these, I guess I could call them traps that these cyber criminals may have. So open Wi-Fi is definitely one to check. I know it's convenient, especially when you're in the airport and you're on the go. You just want to log on real quick, use your email to, send an email or so. And sometimes the hotel as well, but you want to make sure you're verifying and checking and making sure.
And sometimes, we've been looking at artificial intelligence, like the Chat GPT, and I've read some articles that warn, like the Chat GPT, be careful about what kind of information you put in, because who knows what they're doing with that info. Have you heard anything at the national level on artificial intelligence with some of these issues?
Yeah, we're monitoring AI. I mean, AI is, here definitely for sure, and they say it's not about the use of AI, but how people are using it and so forth. So I think even now, Chat GPT, if I'm not mistaken, if you go on there, there is even like a disclaimer there that you should not put personal information there. And I was like, if Chat GPT is saying that, then that's clear that you have to be very careful, because people are using AI. It's a tool. People, use it for more efficient purposes and so forth. But we got to make sure that we're not putting personal information there, because we do not know where it's being stored. We do not know who has access to it, and so forth. And the last thing you want is that information out there to Lord knows where and who has access to it. But please do not put any personal information on there. Just refrain from it, because there's a lot of the unknown, and unfortunately the people who do know are the cyber criminals. So we don't want to be at risk there.
Yeah, definitely. And some of the things that Alan mentioned was talking about flash drives, like the crooks will leave flash drives laying around, people will attach them to their computer. I think that's a little old school crime, but that's something to think of. virtual private networks, thinking about cookies and how social media companies are even tracking you. Trying to think what else we got here. Some of our laws in South Carolina, we've dealt with like some of these cameras and microphones. The laws are kind of antiquated. You're talking about the laws are evolving every day. So keeping up with NAR, I saw your window of the law on this information. That's a good way to keep up with it. What are some other ways through NAR that members can keep up to date on this information when they want to update this? They can look at window of the law. What are some other assets that you guys offer?
Yeah, so on the QR code, I have the wire fraud topic page that is periodically updated. Every year, at least twice a year, you'll see hot topics that's released from Katie Johnson, our chief legal officer, and you will be surprised, but cybersecurity, data privacy is up there, and that's where we'll also update with resources made available. I also encourage members to, look and work with their state and local associations as well, because if it's on NAR's radar, I'm sure it's on your state and local association's radar. But periodically check in. We update the toolkit every few years as well. The most recent one is the one I provided, but definitely check that out as well. There are a lot of resources, and I know that even with the resources I provided may seem a lot, but take your time, go through them, and you will see that NAR has a whole page dedicated to cybersecurity. There's a page on wire fraud there. And then the window to the laws, like I said, we've already had 3 videos or so. I'm sure there's going to be another one coming up soon this year or relatively soon, as data privacy is changing with the laws, and now the criminals are getting even more crafty and savvy.
Super. And then when we saw your biography, we were all very impressed. And I kind of give you a heads up, we were interested in talking to some. When you work with the nonprofits, can you kind of tell us, a lot of our viewers are association executives and staff, they might be interested in this. What's some of your legal experience with nonprofits in the legal world before you came to the National Association of Realtors?
Yeah, so in private practice, I was representing nonprofits, small and large, from charities to large foundations, and then also working with a variety of associations. So that kind of gave me, sparked my interest in learning a little bit more about associations. But I think a lot of times people don't realize that, let's just say, the umbrella of nonprofits and associations fall into that, and all different types of nonprofits. There are a lot of legal needs that are there, right? From contract to governance, to policy work, to credentialing and so forth. So I had the opportunity to work with a variety of nonprofit professionals in regards to what their nonprofit needs are. There's some employment related matters, as you can imagine, as well. And now data privacy is one of those, as well, as they're outsourcing them, the services and transfer of data and so forth. So I got to get my hands involved in a lot of things, but it was very interesting working with the association specifically, because I was working with a variety of different associations, trade associations, member associations, and I believe that helped me coming into NAR as well, working with realtors and understanding state and local associations and so forth.
Fantastic. Another thing that was impressive was your work with the Supreme Court of the United States. You have any kind of Supreme Court stories you can share with the members that might be interested, kind of legal? The 3 of us obviously are interested. Anything, a short story that you're able to share about your time at the Supreme Court?
Well, that internship was, life-changing on so many levels. I had the opportunity to clerk, be in the clerk's office and help with assembling briefs and preparing documents for the justices before they go into deliberations and the conferences. The opportunity to work closely with the attorneys within the clerk's office. I don't think a lot of people realize there are attorneys who are working there as well, and seeing how their work supports the overall institution of the Supreme Court. And one funny story that I say is, I remember I was in the elevator once, and I was going upstairs to go deliver some documents for one of the law clerks. And I happened to be in the elevator with the late Ruth Ginsburg. And it was quite shocking for me as a young one, but she was the sweetest person. And she kind of gave me a little smirk, because I think she realized I was just an intern trying to find my way around. But it was one thing to be within the Supreme Court and seeing the operations, but then to meet a justice and had the opportunity to meet a few of the other justices as well. So definitely a life-changing experience.
That's fantastic. And then some of the things you do with the NAR in your biography, it talks about your, obviously on the legal team at NAR, but you're working with the internal groups and teams and the subsidiaries and affiliates. Talking about the benefit program, strategic alliance. What are some things you do at NAR that the members and the association executives might be interested to learn?
Yeah, I think you mentioned that I provide legal support to the Realtors Relief Foundation and the most recently one, the Realtor Fund for Global Assistance. And these are really great organizations that NAR has that provide support, not only just to our members, but even beyond, but through our members. So have an opportunity to work with our volunteer leaders as they are fulfilling the mission of both of these charities, understanding that the work I do and supporting them is helping them further that mission. And then I think what's rewarding actually is hearing the stories about how lives have been changed. I'm sure you've heard about the Realtor Relief Foundation and the impact that they've had across this nation. And I'm in great anticipation for the Realtor Fund for Global Assistance as it's getting started and looking to support on the international level as well. So helping them with their charitable activities and making sure that they remain legally compliant with state and or federal laws, with the IRS and so forth. So it's actually kind of fun work. And with my background with charities, it just works very well coming in to support those two organizations.
That sounds some great efforts. We have a Realtor Relief Foundation here, and then Tiara operates our American Dream of Home Ownership. Tiara, if you want to talk about the license plate and the grants with the Habitat, please.
So we have these license plates available to purchase in South Carolina, and the money that is used from the purchase of the license plate, each year we solicit local Habitat for Humanities that are doing new construction and home builds, and all of the money that gets used, we divide it between the applicants that apply for that, which are the Habitat. So that happens every year in November. The applications will open up in October. And if anyone has any questions about that, you can just email me. But that's just something, it says homeownership, the American dream, because it's kind of going towards our mission of keeping home ownership affordable and doing things to protect those property rights for people in our state. So that is something that we've been doing for some years now.
Super. And then, this is kind of our top 10, our legal hotlines, the things we're dealing with recently. So once I go through these top 10, if you have any questions for us about what we're seeing on the hotline, but number one is always forms. Austin handles our standard forms committees, the staff liaison. We've got some forms changes. Austin, what are some form changes that we'll be seeing in the near future?
Recently, the board of directors passed a 30-day right to vacate form. That'll be a form that can be used in property management both by the landlord and or the tenant to essentially give the proper notice that they're going to be vacating within 30 days. Also, are amending or changing our assumption of mortgage form that currently exists. Right now, it's currently a standalone contract. This would sort of morph it more into an addendum that could be used in combination with our contract, since we are seeing increased calls about parties wanting to make an assumption of mortgage part of the deal.
Super. And then number three is kind of our other category, Maame. It's scams that we've talked about today. A lot of those, especially the vacant land sale, we're seeing a lot of those more recently. Self-dealing with realtors that are trying to buy and sell real estate, some of the disclosures and legal risk when they do that. Number four is license law, and Austin's working on the lobbying team with that for 2024. Number five is advertising. A lot of times we see company name has to go on the sign. Austin, Tiara, what are some hotline advertising issues y'all have seen of late?
Yeah, I was just talking to Austin about this earlier. It's been a couple of issues with team names and just always making sure that your advertisements are reflective and that a consumer can easily see who's listing this property and that it's not confusion with the name. And that's for consumer protection in case they do need to file a complaint. We want them to be able to know, who's responsible and have that information. So anytime you're advertising or listing a property, just be very clear and be very accurate in your descriptions and also disclosure, which kind of relates to this, but you have to disclose certain things, and it's just better because people often find out about it or it's what ends up stopping the deal because the proper disclosures weren't made in a timely fashion where someone feels like they didn't have all the information to make the best choice with buying a home.
Yeah, good points. Austin, any advertising issues you've seen on the hotline of late?
Yeah, I mean, mainly just making sure you're painting an accurate picture of what you're putting out there. That when folks go to look at the property, it doesn't look completely different than what was on the internet. And in regards to any advertising, make sure you have the full name of your brokerage firm in all advertisement. That is the only thing that is required to be in an advertisement under state law is the full name of the brokerage firm. So make sure that at all times that's there, is visible to the public, and don't make the public or an investigator go try to find it.
Super. And then, Maame, what we have in our residential and commercial forms is kind of a due diligence period where the buyer can do their due diligence before they close. So that's number 6, due diligence issues. Tiara, any kind of due diligence hotlines you've seen?
Yes. The buyer is under obligation to either go forward with buying the home or to terminate during the due diligence period. You don't want to wait till after the period. So if you were to be going on vacation or anything like that and you know your due diligence period is ending, during that time you want to make prior arrangements to make sure it's handled. And that to properly terminate, you need the notice of termination, which is just our standard form that you can find in your forms library, and you need the termination fee to be in hand to the seller, to properly terminate. Both of those things are necessary under due diligence.
Super. Austin, any due diligence issues you're seeing?
I think the biggest thing is just making sure that your buyer knows when and why they will have to pay that fee. They are clearly looking at our notice of termination form, looking at their various options for terminating the contract. If one of the other ones applies, then they don't need to do due diligence and the termination fee won't be paid. But otherwise, if they want to terminate, they need to do so during the due diligence period and pay that termination fee.
Super. Number 7 is professionalism. That's just based on sheer numbers. Obviously, that should be number 1 because it's one of the big complaints we get. Other realtors not being professional. We do statewide professional standards, Maame, for the whole state now, handling ethics complaints, arbitration, commission disputes. We offer mediation services and ombudsman. Austin, for ombudsman, what are some of the pros of using an ombudsman in an ethics complaint that you've seen?
One, you get to be in control of the outcome. Ombudsman is simply a facilitator to try to find a solution that works for both the complainant and the respondent. So it's a quicker process. It avoids you having to go to a full hearing, at which point 5 individuals you've never met in your life are going to make a determination on what happened. Ombudsman allows the 2 parties that were actually involved in the dispute to try to find a path forward that works for both of them.
Super. And Tiara, you just taught a professionalism class last week at the Grand Strand in Myrtle Beach area. What are some things that came up during that class with those realtors?
Yes, some things that came up were basically we can know the code and, talk about it and do things like this to train people. But some of the complaints that some of the attendees had were that people weren't doing the right thing. They weren't doing things according to license law, or they weren't following the advertising rules. So it's important that we hold, our profession to a certain standard, and that if someone is violating our code of ethics, that we're getting the complaint in so that we can go through that proper, semi-judicial process to make sure that we're all being held to that realtor standard. So it's not enough to just know what to do. You actually have to follow through and do this on the day-to-day in your business. And it's all for protection for you as a realtor. And that's why we conduct trainings and why we have the legal hotline, because we don't want a situation where you're getting sued or where you're getting a complaint that you could lose your license. It's all very preventative and to just encourage us to be on that higher standard.
Good point, great. Number 8 was compensation. Realtor Lisa Alexander did a video on our YouTube channel about how realtors get paid. So make sure that's number 1 thing you want, right? You want to make money at this. You want to be profitable. So watch that video. So we get compensation disputes on the hotline. Number 9 was kind of disclosure issues, disclosing things in writing. We have a state seller disclosure form, Maame, for your information. Austin, on disclosure, what are some issues you've seen on the hotline for disclosure issues?
Mostly it's just, again, it's parties knowing something and not being straightforward about it, or not disclosing personal interest in a property, not disclosing that it's a family member that they're representing, so sort of really going and looking at, the disclosure requirements and the seller disclosure, as well as looking at, Articles 4, 5, and 6 of the Code of Ethics.
Tiara, same question. Any disclosure issues you've seen on the hotline recently?
Yes, I would just say over disclosure is better than under disclosure. So even in times where you may see a question and you're like, well, I may not, if I read this to the strictest sense, I may not be under a duty to disclose. We would still say disclose it, because then you don't have to worry about it coming back. You don't have to worry about, someone feeling like they weren't kept in the loop. So even if it could be a maybe you don't have to disclose, we would say, go ahead and disclose that. But of course, if you're under a legal duty to disclose, then that's when you don't have any choice. So you want to make sure you're accurate on where that stands as far as material items that are necessary to disclose.
Super. And then the top 10 is property management, earnest money. It was a tie. Austin, any highlights on property management or earnest money calls you've gotten on the hotline recently?
Again, the biggest thing with the earnest money is just knowing when it's owed, knowing that there's no automatic right to it by either party, regardless of the circumstances. And really, paragraph 5 of your contract is going to be the only time earnest money is discussed, and that's sort of your guiding principle on when is the earnest money due, and what happens if there's not a resolution that can be reached by the parties.
Super. And a lot of lawyers are holding earnest money down. Were you telling me something about if a lawyer holds earnest money, the real estate commissioners want you to check on it and make sure it gets there? What's the latest on that?
Correct. So, license law essentially says that you have to act in the best interest of your client, that you have to verify that those funds are being delivered. Because in our contract, for example, if the earnest money is supposed to be due on Monday and the buyer doesn't turn it in until Thursday, well, anytime between Monday and Thursday, the seller can terminate the contract under paragraph 5 for that money not being turned in timely. If the listing agent waits until the following Monday to call and ask about the earnest money, well, at that point, the money's in, and the seller doesn't have the right to terminate. So by the listing agent not following through, they've essentially cost their seller 3 possible days that they could have terminated that contract, maybe accepted a backup that they preferred more. On the buyer's side, the buyer's agent also needs to be verifying that those funds are turned in timely, because if not, they need to be calling their buyer and say, hey, listen, you understand at any moment the seller can pull out of this contract, so you need to be getting those funds over to the attorney as soon as possible. But the commission is essentially held that proper supervision, best interest of the client dictates that you are following up on that earnest money and making sure it's actually delivered timely.
Yeah, very important. Tiara, same question. Any property management, earnest money questions you've seen on the hotline?
Just keeping an account of any security deposits that you're holding. You want to treat any money that you're holding in escrow, whether that's earnest money or security deposits, that needs to be in a separate account. You don't want to commingle funds. You don't want to, use those funds on something, even if you're able to quickly replace the money. That needs to be held. That's held in trust. That's not your money, and it needs to have proper accounts of where it is at all times to avoid possibly losing your license or any other further infractions.
Yeah, exactly. And Maame, this portion of the podcast is what we call Is It Legal? It's kind of like a little game show, a little quiz thing. Tiara, you said you had some Is It Legal questions? Is
it legal to contact a person who is on the no-call list and they've told you that information?
Do not call. I say if they're on the list, don't call. What do you say, Austin?
I would agree.
Maame, what say you?
Do not call them, please. Don't.
Yes, that is the correct answer. Is it in the best interest, or is it legal to just use very easy passwords that can be, guessed, like things with your name or children's name? Is that best practices?
No.
I say it's not best practice. Yeah.
I would say no.
Correct. So what is best practices, just for a review on passwords, when setting those passwords?
Well, you definitely do not want to use your name, either your first, middle, or last name. Birth dates are not good as well. I have to say this, but social security numbers are not best practice as well. But you oftentimes see this when you're logging in or creating an account with a business. They will usually suggest that includes special characters, uppercase, lowercase, and so forth. But definitely no personal information in your password. And I think, Byron, you mentioned this, but also remember that you don't want to put a cheat sheet on a sticky note on your computer that has the passwords, because then that's available too. So making sure that you're securing those passwords, but making sure they're kind of difficult. They shouldn't contain personal information, and don't use the same password for every account that you have too, because cyber criminals can pick up on that and they can see the trend.
Super. And then, Maame, if you do you have any, with the state attorneys here, any questions you have for state attorneys, anything you always have been curious about the state association? Thank you for always helping us with everything, but any information that you need from us on this issue, or any closing thoughts?
No, I was quite interested to hear the top 10 legal hotline questions. That was quite interesting to hear, because I like to hear what is happening at the state and local level. So thank you for sharing those. And it sounds like you all are on top of it and you provide great resources available to the members and so forth, especially about like disclosures and so forth. So thanks for letting me listen in and then hear from you all directly as to what you may be encountering or addressing.
Thanks for joining us today. Any closing thoughts, Tiara?
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Austin, closing thoughts?
Yeah. Thank you again for attending. It was a lot of great information. I always learn something from when we get a chance to interact with our counterparts at the National Association. So certainly appreciate your time today and taking the time to speak to our members about this important issue.
Truly my pleasure, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Maame, and we'll hope to see you at Realtor events. I'll be on the Risk Management Committee. I know you're the staff liaison. That's an important committee. Thanks to Mike Christ, our producer director, Sharon Stone that produces. Thanks for the legal team today, and thanks for you, Maame. Say hello to everybody on the legal team. Realtors, keep it safe, legal, and profitable. See you next time.